The title of my talk, God in the Hands of a Dreaming Mother. Mary and the Incarnation. Nothing happens without Mary. We are all aware now that Nicaea marks a crucial turning point. And what is that turning point? The Nicene Creed presents a profound turning of theology into the life of God. The Creed makes clear that the life of Jesus exegetes the life of God. And Christian theology will now be marked by how well it does that exegesis. Whether it presses more deeply into the mystery of God incarnate, or, how should we say, seeks to manage mystery by positing a space, epistemic or ontic or existential, between Jesus and God. A space that the Creed suggests does not exist. Jesus, however, deepens the mystery of God, a mystery that marks the sheer freedom of God to be for us and with us. But none of this happens without Mary. It remains a strange fact, my friends, that reflection on Jesus in his triune identity is often distanced from reflection on Mary. Most reflection on the life of Jesus and most Christologies that scale the heights of technical acumen and conceptual sophistication give scant consideration to Mary. Now, this is not to deny, as many of you know, that Mariology and Christology develop under different theoretical pressures and different devotional regimes. But that difference does not imply distance if we take Mary seriously. Yet this evening, what does it mean for us to take Mary seriously? This has been a question that has haunted Christian thought, especially Protestant thought, from the beginning. What does it mean to take Mary seriously, especially at this moment in history? So in my time this evening, I will take Mary seriously. I contend that we cannot grasp the creedal spirit of Nicaea without understanding Jesus through Mary. That is to say, Mary holds it all together for us. Theology itself pivots on her. It is those words present in the Nicene Creed, was incarnate of the Virgin Mary and became human. Like the words present before it in the Apostles' Creed, born of the Virgin Mary, and the words that will show up later in the Chalcedonian formulation or the Chalcedonian Creed, of Mary the Virgin, comma, the God-bearer, which shows us that Mary is the human hinge in history, and also the turning point in how we should understand the act and being of God within creation. So taking Mary seriously involves contemplating Mary in her full humanity, keeping Jesus close to her, and thinking alongside her into the God-drenched reality that was her life. Now, my friends, such thinking quickly abandons any desire to find the historical Mary, to strip away centuries of theological reflection and spiritual discernment to recalibrate a history of Mary. My thinking alongside Mary will not be a historical quest, thank God, to locate the real Mary as opposed to the dogmatic construction of Mary. But it will also shun the instrumentalization of Mary, of her body, the turning of her into a tool for God's use. It will also resist deploying her life for creating regimes of purity that colonize sexuality. I will also avoid, as much as possible, those metaphysical debates about her sinlessness. I enjoy a good metaphysic like anybody else, but let's just leave that alone. And one other thing I will try to do, I will try as best I can to hold at bay the theological impulse, as strong as it is, to turn Mary into a symbol of the church. In other words, I will resist mapping metaphor across Mary's body. I'll follow the wisdom of the Roman Catholic theologian for a moment here, Elizabeth Johnson, who reminds us of what Mary is not. And I'm quoting Elizabeth Johnson here. She says, Mary is not a model, a type, an archetype, a prototype, an icon, a representative figure, a theological idea, an ideological cipher, a metaphor, a utopian principle, a feminine essence, the image of the eternal feminine, an ideal disciple, ideal woman, ideal mother, a myth, a persona, a corporate personality, and every woman, a cultural artifact, a literary device, a motif, an exemplar, a paradigm, a sign, or in any other way a religious symbol. All of these terms are drawn from contemporary religious writings, she says. To the contrary, as with any human being, as with every woman, she is first and foremost herself. End of beautiful quote. I also seek a Mary who is first and foremost herself, but at the same time, Theotokos. To take Mary seriously as Theotokos, as God-bearer, means we must enter the beautiful practice of Mariological contemplation, which carries in its center Marian devotional practices. Now, those devotional practices remain an underappreciated energy in Christology and in Christological reflection. In fact, for our Christological reflection to come fully to the humanity of God, it requires Mariological contemplation. The Mary we must contemplate, is one who, in the words of the African-American theologian and mystic Howard Thurman, lives with her back constantly against the wall. Not only because she is a poor peasant living under Roman occupation, but also because she is called by God. And callings are always an invitation to an act, to make visible trust in God. Yet Mary's life does not only make visible her trust in God, but it also makes visible God's trust in us. Specifically, God's trust in her. And so, through prose and a few images and a little bit of poetry, I want to follow Mary into the embrace of God. And in this way, consider what the Nicene Creed invites us to explore, the depth of the divine life shown to us in the incarnation. Indeed, I want to center the word embrace in relation to Mary and her life with God. It is an embrace that moves in two directions, my friends. God embracing, yes, and God being embraced. It is that creaturely embracing that opens up to us, unfolds for us the triune life as its source. The triune life echoes, if you will, in the embrace. So then, being a good professor and teacher, I want to think that twofold embrace in three ways. And also being Baptist, we do things in threes. The embrace of creation, the embrace of our struggle against injustice and evil, and the embrace of our dreaming. One more time. The embrace of creation, the embrace of our struggle against injustice and evil, and the embrace of our dreaming. This will, however, not be, heuristically speaking, neat and clean, because the embrace is intertwined, woven together in the bodies of Mary and Jesus, beginning with her calling that will become his calling. God calls Mary. That must be said first. And God calls to Mary. That must be said first. Mary's calling exists in two senses. There is the calling of Mary, and then there is the calling to Mary. The calling of Mary means that she will embody the prophetic, expressing in Israel the prophet's legacy of tension in declaring the word of God in the presence of opposition. And in Mary's case, it is opposition to the truth that God is in fact with her in the context of her pregnancy and the birth of her child. We should understand her as someone called by God into ministry and witness. Mary is inside the story of Israel's way with its creator, moving through the specific contours of their life with God, where obedience to God costs everything and is often explainable only to those who share in that obedience to the divine word. The called Mary, the prophet Mary, is crucial for us, and yet the Annunciation has a second sense of calling, well known, but dare I say, terribly underappreciated. There is the calling to Mary. She will take on the task of being the mother of Jesus. We must, however, dear friends, we must stay with Elizabeth Johnson's wisdom, stay with Johnson's refusal here to turn Mary into a model of motherhood, or follow the long and dangerous journey of ontologizing parenting as the universal calling of women. There is indeed a path to be noted here, but it is the path of God. God asks Mary to be God's mother. We must grasp the singularity of this request. Here begins the inner logic of the incarnation. What is that? God requesting, God waiting response. This request unfolds beyond the words of the angel in the Gospel of Luke and into the quotidian realities of Mary's life. It is an unfolding already implied by the words of the angel in Luke's Gospel. Greetings, favored one. The Lord is with you. The Lord will be with her in the crying out at night, needing to be fed, needing to be changed, needing to be held. The Lord will be with her in wanting attention, in the desire to be played with, and the longing for Mary's approval. Again, I want to acknowledge the singularity of Mary, not as the model of motherhood, but as the site, S-I-T-E, the site of the freedom of God. As theologian, Roman Catholic theologian M. Sean Copeland suggests, Mary will enflesh the freedom of God. In this case, it is the freedom of God to be taught, and the freedom of Mary to be teacher, and for Mary to teach. It is the freedom for Mary to be teacher and for God to be a learner. Here we must see the vulnerability of God and the grace of Mary. Mary will be God-bearer, but she will also be the pedagogue of God, the teacher of God, orienting her son to life with the God of Israel, and at the same time, life in the land. She will guide Jesus not only in his humanity, but also in earth touch, in embracing the creation. The image behind me is of Our Lady of the Maze. It was painted by Mother Praxedes Baxter for Mother Maria Evangelistica Fernandez on the occasion of Mother Maria's monastic investiture and entrance into the novitiate at the Abbey of Regina Laudis in Bethlehem, Connecticut in 2007. Mother Mary, reflecting on this wonderful image, states in relation to it, "At Mary's feet is a single corn seed at the moment when it is sprouted, and when it has sprouted. Mary and Jesus here are depicted as the people of the island of Quisquaye, known today as the Dominican Republic and Haiti. These Creole women carried within them Taino, African, and European ancestry and gave birth to Christ's life in what became known as the New World." Here in the image, please note that Jesus clutches a cornstalk with one hand and reaches out with the other hand, suspended in the air in Mary's arms. Mother Mary superintends his touch, guiding his hand to the plant, watching over his virgin grasp of growing life. Now, my friends, there is nothing unusual about this moment of learning. We have been here before, if we had eyes to see where he began, in her arms to see. But we have, in fact, never been here before, slowing down our quick-moving gaze to gather in what is forming in front of us. This is Mary holding her learning baby. Mary introduces Jesus to the creation and to the community of creatures. Indeed, from his beginning, Mary placed Jesus at the center of creation, as attested by the famous scene in his birth in Luke 2:7, "And he gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in bands of cloth and laid him in a manger because there was no place in the guest room." I love the New Revised Standard Version's translation there. There was no place in the guest room. As Kenneth Bailey noted in his lovely little text, Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes, the place of Jesus' birth was a typical village home in Palestine. The guest room. The guest room was already occupied, so Mary placed Jesus in the manger, the place where the animals eat, which is literally an indentation or a small bowl-shaped hole in the floor, or a small wooden structure located in the family room between where the animals would be at a lower level in the same room with the rest of the family. The animals would eat their food and drink their water from the mangers in the room. This past August, I spent 2 weeks in Palestine with Palestinians on the West Bank, and we visited Taybeh, Taybeh, which is one of the last remaining Christian villages on the West Bank. It has been, as many of you might know, under constant attack by Jewish settlers. Yet the people of the village keep alive the story of Jesus. There is in the village a famous house that depicts the kind of place Mary and Joseph would have brought Jesus. It looks exactly like this. The same kind of family room, the same kind of guest room, and the same kind of lower level room where the animals would be at night, and those same mangers. By placing Jesus in the manger, Mary placed her baby in the place where the animals eat and drink, next to where the humans live and eat. There, between the eating and drinking and living of creatures, together we find baby Jesus. He is there at the nexus between the animals and the humans. Mary brings Jesus to creation's touch, amid her touch. And here we can see Mary's life as pedagogue more fully, drawing us into her work of teaching God. Mary is the door, my friends, the door to Jesus' learning of the land and the ways of his people with the land. He learns from her and from his people about the seed and plants, crops, harvest, rain, water. Mary is the first storyteller for Jesus, who introduces him to life with the dirt, fish and wind, sea and mountains. Mary shows us a God who listens and who intensifies that listening in Jesus. Jesus is the intensification of listening to the land and to the community of creatures from the place of the creature. This recalls for me my own mother, whose name just happened to be Mary, and who invited me every spring to become a garden disciple. So allow me to read you a poem entitled Garden Disciple. Garden Disciple. She called me to the garden, that ritual of spring, announcing new life. There my mother, on bended knee, in black Michigan dirt, as if praying like in church or at her bed, made me join her on the ground, now made ready through her sweat and knowledge and water. Reach your hand in deep, she demanded. I knew what my obedience would mean. Now I would feel the wet soil covering my hand, enveloping my wrist, pulling up my arm, pulling me in. Boy, that's life, she would say. Do you feel it? The blank stare on my face, covered with boredom, told her I did not. I was spring and too young to feel soil knowledge. She smiled and told me, go get her seeds, dried and stored, hidden from winter, for such a time as this. Her mind, her planting begun, her mind focused on a future that only she could see in the ground, each spot chosen for the plant that would bear witness. Soon her time of planting would be done. My time of planting has now come. Imagine, as we should, the other Mary, Mother Mary, guiding the child Jesus in earth touch, what to eat, what not to eat, what to notice, and what to be awed by. Jesus learns from Mary of his people's oneness with the earth and how to be thankful to God for the gifts of life given by the God of Israel, who is indeed his God. Jesus learns from Mary how to live in those gifts, how to nest one's life in the sensuality of a restorative and edifying creation, how to be nurtured by wind, sun, the sight and sound of birds, the beauty and taste of plants and animals, and water become wine. Mary binds bone to dirt for Jesus, showing his holy life bound up in dirt life. Dirt life. Jesus also learns from Mary that he is the promised gift rooted in the land itself. As the Spirit moved to create all that is, so too the Spirit brought him to life through her. Thus, Mary, as the first storyteller, is the earth storyteller who situates her child, this child of God, in the creation and in the working of the Spirit in creation. And in this way, he hears the earth itself speaking through his own mother. This speaking, though, need not imply ecological ventriloquism, nor need it mean that Mary is a shaman who initiates Jesus in its sensibilities. Mary teaches her child to listen, to sense, and thereby to know. Mary enables an epistemic grounding, let's say that, an epistemic grounding of her child in her own earth listening and sensing in the Spirit. This is not, of course, let's be clear, this is not knowledge for knowledge's sake. This is the grounding of the salvific in the earth itself, that Jesus will align with his own body. In word and deed, he will announce the healing work of the creation in concert with his life. Now, of course, those of you who are a bit skeptical, let me just say this. There is, however, no historical record of this guidance. No canonical or extra-canonical evidence to support my claims here. I'm so glad you said that. We have no evidence that Mary held Jesus to her breast and fed him, like others might, spoke and sang to him while she fed him. We have no evidence that she washed him, and in so doing caressed and watched over every part of his body. We have no evidence that she covered him when he was cold and uncovered him in the heat and allowed him to feel the sun on his skin and taught him the word for son. We have no record that she sat on the ground with him, as many mothers would do, and showed him how to touch the dirt. That she put his hand on a tree and said to him the word for tree. Or held up a seed and said to him the word for seed. No evidence that she placed him in water and guided his hands in the water, showing him how to sit in it, play in it, drink it. We have no evidence. We have no evidence that Mary shared her stories with him or taught Jesus anything. But do we need evidence, y'all? Do we need evidence? Do we need an extra gospel to lay this up? I don't know if we need evidence, but, that's just me. To focus here on Mary, of course, the other thing people always ask me, to focus here on Mary is not to exclude the community of teachers that surround Jesus, including Joseph. Yet by staying with Mary, we are pressing against a habit of thought rooted in patriarchy that quickly turns women, and in this case Mary, into a stage prop. Narrative background that must be transcended to come to the man who knows. Mariological contemplation shuns such backgrounding of Mary. from the Apostles' Creed, as we mentioned earlier, through the Nicene Creed and on through the Chalcedonian formulation and creed, and deep into the emergence of Marian devotion, Joseph will never be foregrounded, precisely because Mary can never be bypassed. You cannot bypass Mary. As Jacob of Surig, the 5th century Syrian poet and priest who later became a bishop, helps us see in one of his poems where he states, in part, it's a long poem, but I'm just going to stay a little bit. You can't really read it, but I'm just going to state it for you because it's such a beautiful poem. He says in part, heaven and Mary were for him equal when he dwelt in her, yet not equal. For to the one who beholds her, Mary is greater. Heaven is his throne, and Mary his mother, and behold, they are not equal. For the throne does not resemble the mother, because the mother is greater. Heaven and Mary, singly, he chooses the both of them. He made one of them a throne and the other a mother. I will not call heaven Mary, lest be dishonored the mother of the king by the name of his throne, and he become angry with me. Heaven beholds the maiden mother and the only begotten. Between the two of them, who is greater and who is more blessed? Which of them is nearer to him and dearer to him and more precious to him and more united to him? Heaven did not conceive him, nor bear him, nor suckle him, but she bore, embraced, raised him, and to her belong a blessing. Indeed, to read Mary and Joseph as a couple inside the logics of the heteronormative nuclear family is to quickly lose sight of her and the drama of her journey and the reality of her prophetic witness, guiding Jesus to hear a communicative and animate world, to know a community of creatures that is poised to participate in the witness to the divine life. There is heaven, but there is Mary, the mother who teaches God. Where Jesus comes to the knowledge of place, it begins with him being shown by his mother how to allow the earth to speak to him, and through him at the same time, that he will allow God to speak to and through him. Now, of course, we're talking about different languages, but a joined, even braided communication. Mary holds Jesus in what the anthropologist Eduardo Kahn, K-O-H-N, Eduardo Kahn, would call the semiosis of the world, shown through plant and water, bird and donkey, and every animal, harvesting and planting. She envelops him in the moving and responding, the acting and reacting, the reciprocity of living creatures, thereby giving Jesus insight into the hearing and knowing. Jesus inhabits with his mother the semiosis of the world, one which will anchor him in the world created by the God of Israel, who he calls Father, and who he will sense and know through the Spirit. So, if God in Jesus embraces the creation, then through Mary, Jesus learns that he is embraced by the creation. And he learns how to respond to that embrace. By deepening his own embrace, he will deepen his own embrace until he becomes one with the communion of creatures, until he becomes one with the eating and being eaten. This means, of course, follow me, this means we need not divinize and worship the creation, no more than we should make the creation and creatures simply stage props for the drama of salvation. We should follow Jesus into the listening and sensing of an animate and communicative world, recognizing that we too live always between the eating and the receiving, and the giving of ourselves to one another. Jesus will show us how to embrace and be embraced by the creation. Now, if Mary grounds Jesus in her own listening and sensing, making real in him her connection to life in the land and with God, she will also bring Jesus into the story of Israel, his people. But more decisively, far more decisively, she brings him into her story of scandal, threat, and escape. She must have told him that Herod, the Roman state, and its agents sought to kill him when he was just a baby. These enemies were people who had given themselves to violence and fear for a future that they could not control. That Matthew chapter 2 passage, verses 13 and 14, are especially helpful here. An angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there till I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This is the story of Mary, sought after by enemies who hated and feared what she was bringing into the world, yet held in the hands of God she was. Mary knew fleeing and looking over her shoulder and thirsting for safety, and vigilantly watching for danger, and with it all trusting in God. If Jesus was a child like any other child, he would sense the danger around him, even if he could not share in his mother's experiences, even if it was not spoken by his mother. This will be Mary's life as it will be Jesus' life. Mary, through her journey of pregnancy, birth, life under the scandalous and constrained conditions of a virgin birth, echoes, if you will, in sentiment, Jeremiah's prophetic lamentation in Jeremiah 7:20, chapter 20, verse 7. Let's start with B, and then go on to verse 9. I became a joke all day long. All mock me. For as often as I speak, I cry out violence and shout destruction. For the word of Adonai has become a reproach to me and derision all day long. If I say, I will not think about it, I will not speak in your name anymore, it becomes like a blazing fire within my inner person, shut up within my bones. I am exhausted holding it in, and I do not have the power to do so. Mary's Jeremiad will become her son's Jeremiad, and both will be mixed with praise. This is the nature of the prophetic journey. Mary's sojourn also echoes that of Israel and anticipates the path of her son. The son, however, is in the journey of Mary, even as Mary shares in the divine life. Even as Mary shares in the divine life, as depicted by arguably one of the most powerful and dynamic of Marian icons. The icon, the famed icon of the unburned bush. In this icon drawn by Lori Jubran-Caudill, who was an artist living in Jerusalem, Mary as the unburned bush illumines the dynamic of an enfolded life. Jesus is in the life of Mary, and Mary is in the prophetic life that reaches back to Moses, and now in the life of God. Mary is the burning bush, one of my favorite icons. Mary is the burning bush, as the famed Coptic hymn that refers to this icon states, and I quote, "The fiery bush that Moses saw was not consumed, so Mary carried the fire of divinity in her womb." I love that. Mary is in the bush, and the Christ child is in Mary, holy fire without and within. It is the place from where Moses will come to know his God and know his calling. And Moses was the first prophet of Israel. So Mary the last prophet who brought forth the last prophet. The story of Mary, then, is first the story of Jesus, held in the hands of God but sought after by enemies who hate and fear her/him. This is the story of Mary/Jesus, surrounded by death and violence and mourning and the operations of the Roman Empire aimed against her/his body and her/his people. God may be hidden in Mary's baby boy, but God's enemies show themselves in how they kill and destroy for the sake of control. If God in Jesus embraces our struggle against injustice and evil, then through Mary, Jesus learns that he is embraced in the struggle against violence and its tempting power. This is the struggle of faith, beginning in his mother, that he must make his own. They tried to kill you, and they continue to try to kill you, Jesus. Here, we've moved beyond the theological slogan that God identifies with the struggles, with our struggles and our suffering, and that of the oppressed of this world. We have entered the place where memory and legacy, weave with murder and violence, fear and hatred, and the conflict between Jew and Gentile, and life under empire. Jesus will not escape Mary's struggle. Indeed, he was born in it and for it. It is precisely Mary's struggle that is her people's struggle, that becomes Jesus' struggle, that brings me finally to Mary's dreaming. And here we must come to another dreamer so crucial for Mary, and that is Elizabeth. Elizabeth. Mary goes to Elizabeth, you know the story, and enters her home. Although Mary enters Elizabeth's home, Elizabeth has entered the prophetic reality of Mary, sharing with her in the Spirit's presence, joining their bodies in a future aimed at ending their oppression. As Luke presents it, Mary and Elizabeth span the improbable to the impossible. Elizabeth was long past childbearing years, and Mary a virgin. Their improbable and impossible form in the context of lives caught up in the reality of the angel's words. For nothing will be impossible with God. Luke 1:37. Elizabeth speaks the future that she acknowledges as she acknowledges the presence of her Lord in utero. She now knows that what Mary knows, that Mary carries the liberator of Israel in her womb. And Elizabeth carries John, the one who will announce that liberation. They are bound together in the working of the Spirit, connecting their children and connecting their dreaming. In this icon, also drawn by Laurie Jubran-Cowdew, she depicts Mary and Elizabeth in joyful embrace. One of my favorite icons. I love this one. Mary and Elizabeth in joyful embrace. Their eyes meet each other, and the babies in their wombs face each other. They wave at each other. What's up, man? What's up? What's up, dog? What's happening? I love it. The babies in the womb face each other. The descending Spirit dove inaugurates the new, anticipating the Spirit baptism of John and then of Jesus at his baptism. I imagine that like many mothers, Mary and Elizabeth may allow their dreams for what their children will become to take flight. But unlike other mothers, their dreaming has already been directed toward the freedom of their people by the Spirit. They both know that pregnancies are prophetic, shaped in the holy will of God. They now live in revolutionary design. Yes, they live in revolutionary design, formed in the desire of God. Indeed, Mary with Elizabeth will become partners in revolutionary dreaming. We can see that revolutionary dreaming expressed in Mary's famed Magnificat. Mary becomes an agent of revolution through whom God will scatter the proud in their imaginations, bringing down the powerful from their thrones and lifting up the lowly. The hungry will finally know the goodness of the land in its fullness by being fed, and the rich will not be allowed to increase their wealth. They will go away empty. Empty. This is dreaming down to the bone and dirt, a dreaming bound to and for freedom. Again, Jacob of Sarug, in his poetic way of contemplating the encounter of Mary and Elizabeth, here's what he suggests, a world beholding itself in promise of his renewal. So look at the images I read this section of his poem. It's a very long poem, and I don't have time to read it. So I'm just going to read a section of his beautiful poem. But notice the icon as I read this. The loving encounter of the kin again amazes me. Word of it moves me to manifest its beauty. The maiden and the old woman grant me a tale full of wonder. Love moves me, that while I am marveling, I may speak of it. They look at each other like regions in their manifestations, east and west, in which their times are depicted. The old woman is similar to the region in which evening is depicted, which enshrouds and buries the light in its old age. The maiden is similar to the east, the mother of the early morning, which carries the day in its bosom to bring it to earth. Morning and evening look at each other lovingly, so that in youth and in old age a sense of wonder may increase. Morning, which carries the great sun of righteousness, and evening, in which is the star that proclaims concerning the light. The great king dwells in the maiden and weaves crowns. The old woman carries the servant announcing the kingdom. That's a great poem. We should follow the thought of Sergius Bulgakov here and see the ministry of Jesus more strongly aligned with the ministry of Mary. As he said, those places in the gospel where the curtain of silence about Mary is open slightly, we sense Mary's anticipation of the revolutionary work of her son. There, in the presence of Elizabeth, they form a space conducive for revolutionary dreaming that grasps the impossible, a life in the land beyond the Roman Empire in a transformed world. If Mary stayed 3 months with Elizabeth, I can imagine that the conversation continued over months. As the years unfolded, I imagine Mary and Elizabeth sitting with Jesus and John at their feet, their children listening, learning through their voices and gestures, and they're listening and sensing with the land in the community of creatures how and what to dream. Let me share, as I prepare to close, a wonderful little poem that came to me as I was meditating upon that image and my own life with my mother, Mary, and her twin sister, Martha. Yeah, I come from that kind of family, you know. I come from that kind of family, Bible family. Many of you do too. Half the family's named by Bible figures. Peter, James, John, okay, Nahum. Okay. So this poem is entitled The Knee Baby. The Knee Baby. Some of you know what that means. If you don't, ask somebody. I was raised a knee baby, which means I was raised in and near my mother's lap, always close to her beating heart. I always sat there between my mother Mary and her twin sister Martha as they talked about the world, from politics to parenting, from God to cooking, from troubled children to troubles in their souls and bodies. I heard their sighing, their crying, their praying, and their singing, and especially their humming, marvelous, multi-layered humming that captured their stories and their joys. And I took it all in. I took it all into my soul. and my body. What if John and Jesus took it all into their souls and their bodies? Where would God in flesh learn to dream if not at the feet of God's dreaming mother? Again, we have no evidence of this, but the question remains, do we need evidence? When poor and oppressed mothers who live close to the dirt move in hope under difficult conditions, they often create intentionally or unconsciously spaces of hope. Those spaces create life. The historian and philosopher Sylvia Federici calls these spaces of reproduction, constituted by women's multiple activities in the land. These are spaces many women have known where they grasp the power of their own creativity in the production of life, of plant, animal, body, and places to live. The great Vandana Shiva, the philosopher, scientist, and environmental activist, refers to this creative work as women embodying philosophies of life formed through activities like cultivating new plants, through ingenious forms of cross-pollination, creating new farming techniques that have yielded over many centuries vast varieties of foodstuffs, medicines, building materials. These women created a future that no one could see unless they could see life in the dirt. Mary and Elizabeth, I say to you, announced such a space filled with the creative possibility. Yet something else was made visible through that space, the space of their dreaming, the space of the unfolding of the divine and the human. If God in Jesus is drawing the creation into God's own desire, then Jesus is being drawn into a desire formed in Mary's dreaming, shaped in her struggle, calibrated by her sensing and knowing life in a communion of creatures. Jesus learns to dream a future in this world and for this world that will echo Mary's desire for an embodied hope, a materialized hope. And in this way, Jesus will give birth to a new age that begins in him. So, the power of the Nicene Creed is that it points us to a story that cannot be bypassed if we wish to know not only who God is, but also who God will always be. And fundamental to that truth is simply this: God will always be Mary's baby.
Well, I've been joined on the stage by my colleague, Dr. Chris Tilling, who is our senior lecturer in New Testament, and Professor Jane Williams, who is our professor in Christian theology. And so we're going to have a question from Chris and then from Jane, after which she'll start with a conversation with Dr. Jennings. And then as you submit questions, we'll start to pose your questions to Dr. Jennings and the panel as well. But I'd like to start with Chris. Hand it over to you to get us going.
It is so good to see you here, Willie. I mean, we've heard tonight not only a world-class theologian, but a Christian intellectual. Someone wrote an essay of that title, I believe, who always wants to point to our own idolatries and gently call us back to God in Christ. And I think what we have experienced tonight is, it's almost like hearing poetry. The movement is like the movement of prayer. You listen before you speak, and so you've drawn us to a Mary, to listen to a Mary who is Jesus' teacher. I think this is a tremendous and fitting end to this series of public lectures. It's been ecumenical and probing and thought-provoking, so thank you so much. Now to my first question. I was sitting there and just wondering, what are some of the things that might be bouncing around as well in the room? And I thought it would be fun to get your reflections on the notion of God being taught. You know, it's something that in many it will come up. Something will come up, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think even of Aquinas, who, when he was reading that passage in Mark about Jesus not knowing the time or hour, said, oh, he really did know. He just chose not to make it known. But it seems to me you've presented us with a Christology that is unafraid of childhood, of a God who learns. And I'd love you to speak into that anxiety and how you're trying to reframe things.
That's a great question. Thank you for that. Well, I think at heart it does come down to how we understand God and the idea of control. And when we put those two words together, we will often evacuate God of his humanity, because God has to be in control. And so what that means is that the humanity of Jesus is really a performance. It really isn't God's humanity. And what we do by trying to protect an image of control that really isn't necessary is that not only have we robbed God of God's humanity, we have undermined our own humanity. That we've undermined the preciousness of our life with God. It's like to tell my students all the time, God, who is not bound by time, enjoys your time. And we don't stop to think about that. God is with us. It's not a slogan. That each second of our lives with God is sacramental to God. God is with us in the moments. And God can be fully with us in the moments and yet still be God. Indeed, because God is with us in the moments, God is God. And so what this means is that what Mary invites us to see is God glorying in the moments, each moment. That there was not a time when God was faking it. I'm crying because I need my diaper changed, but I really don't need a diaper change. I'm God. And I've actually heard somebody preach a sermon that came very close to that. It's one of those. They took one of those medieval images where it's baby Jesus, but he's an old man, and he's sitting there like this. But Chris, you're raising such a crucial question for us, because as I have always said, the most dangerous words in Christian theology are these: God is in control. We have to, like a surgeon with an incredibly dangerous tool, we have to know how to use those words very carefully. And if in the incarnation we use them in a sloppy way, we undermine not simply the incarnation, but the journey of life itself.
I'd love to carry on with that train of thought, because one of the things that, and I hope I'm not instrumentalizing Mary, I might be, you have to tell me. One of the things that kept coming back to me was, in your phrasing, was was reciprocity. So you said that Mary is embraced by God and embraces God. Mary teaches the word to speak. Luke says that the angel says to Mary, the Lord is with you already. She hasn't done anything. She hasn't said yes to anything. The Lord is with her. There are those particularly struck me when you're talking about the dirt. Brueggemann, in his commentary on Genesis 2, talks about God with his hands in the dirt. And I keep seeing those echoes of God's action and Mary's action and our action, and that sort of extraordinary, generous circle of it works both ways all the way, doesn't it? Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. I love that.
Good.
I love that.
But I suppose I also wanted to go on and ask you what we do with some of the Christian tradition has filled in a lot of stories about Mary.
Yes.
And you were advising us not to go with the genes of purity, I think that was the phrase you used, which is what some of those early and very much loved stories about the infant Mary, the child Mary, go for. Tell us what we do with those that desire to make Mary worthy of bringing Jesus into the world.
Yeah, and that's the thing. What I love, I mean, I'm a Protestant who's been reading a lot of Mariological contemplation, a lot of Marian devotion, and I'm a Protestant who's been reading a lot. I thought, man, these folks are into Mary. But then I realized in some ways I was reading it like a Protestant, like I was reading each one as a theological treatise. Each one, okay, like, I'm reading it like Athanasius on the Incarnation, when in point of fact, if we think of it as just a flowering of singing, I mean, it's not to say that it's not also thoughtful, but the more you read it, you realize there's this exuberance, this joy in recognizing that everything that is good and beautiful in life, it's there with Mary, because God trusted Mary. And of course, that does mean that there are times it will lean toward purity regimes, it will lean toward instrumentalizing Mary, it will lean toward Mary's image of the church. It will in some ways push Mary aside and just kind of glory in the Mary effect. But when you walk around it and see what's being said, it's praising God for the absolute impossible.
Okay, that's helpful.
But what is the impossible in that regard? The impossible is not that God was born by Mary, that God yielded the divine life to Mary. I mean, that's what we have to get our minds around, that God trusted Mary. And so our vision of God trusting us, if we allow that relationship to fill it out, it opens up for us more of the textures of God's own act and being, God's own life. That is God waiting to get fed. That is God waiting to be changed. That is God being afraid and wanting to be held. But we don't do that. So we just, Mary had a baby. But no, okay, it's a whole lot more there than Mary had a baby. God's freedom is being exposed to you in ways that show you that God enters fully into the vulnerability of the human and is yet God. And so your vulnerability is not the site of God's absence. God is present in your vulnerability.
I found myself very touched, now that I am a granny myself, to remember about Holy Annie, God's granny.
That's a great line. Go from there, Chris.
That's really hard. Follow up.
Holy Annie, God's granny. That's good. That's good. That has to be a poem. I got to write that down.
We'll give you time to
That's
write
going to
that
be.
down.
That's going to be a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, Mary. Surely you're onto something here. Many of us who are Protestants, we'll affirm the virgin birth, but Mary is the mother of God. And from early on in church history, from Origin right through to the Council of Ephesus, where it was creedal, we've got an affirmation of Mary as the mother of God. And I found that work fascinating, how you were bringing Mary into this discussion. And that is the issue I wanted to zone into, is how you were doing that. Because at the start, you quote Elizabeth Johnson, where it's quite an impressive quote. It was, Mary is not a type, a prototype, an icon, an ideological cipher, etc. But then you make use of a lot of icons, and then this an unburnt bush. Catholics would see this as a
Isn't that a beautiful icon,
as
though?
a type, but as a type, And then there's the ideological work that's being done with Mary.
Every day.
Is this Mary being used as an ideological cipher again? And I wondered if there was tension there or how you'd address that.
That's a great question, Chris. So, and if you press Elizabeth Johnson on that, she would say, we want Mary first in her humanity. So then, okay, if there is icon, if there's other flowerings of Mary, okay. But we cannot lose her humanity. But there is something really important about, especially the icon and what it means for understanding Mary's life. Here's the other part that's so difficult, especially for us Protestants, to get our minds around. Mary's ongoing life. And for many Protestants, I know some of you might be getting nervous right now, but Mary's ongoing life, and the reason so many people yet identify with Mary. Because Mary is the site of our struggle, right? And that's what's so important. If we take seriously that the struggle of a people is often articulated to the children of that people through the mother, who will help them understand what you are inside of. But not just the struggle, but the dreaming. And so the ongoing reality of dreaming for Jesus then comes out of Mary. I was going to push it further and say, in many ways, the eschatology we see in Jesus, we have to give to Mary. Mary is the one that sets the stage for that. The Magnificat already anticipates that. The rich go away empty. And you hear echoes of that in Jesus, right? So there is something about trying to articulate her ongoing influence on Jesus and then on us that's inside of all that stuff Elizabeth Johnson is worried about. She's worried about, inside of all that, you lose the flesh and blood, the Theotokos, who makes all that possible. And what I love so much about thinking in this way is that it returns to Mary not only her full agency, but her creativity, her dreaming, her hoping, and a child inside the dreams of a mother. If we took a show of hands, I'm sure a lot of people realize that they're inside their mother's dreams. And there's something incredibly powerful about that, soteriologically speaking. We're inside Mary's dreams.
There's some questions from the floor about how this way of understanding Mary impacts in the way that we see some of the other biblical stories in the Gospels where Mary is present. So, for example, at the foot of the cross.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Perhaps also when Jesus seems to speak some harsh words towards Mary. So how can this way of what you've posited help us to think or reimagine some of these encounters?
That's a great question. I thought you were going to mention the wedding at Cana. That's my favorite one.
That's that one as well?
That one always, because for me that's the easiest one, but it's also the greatest one because it's almost as though Mary is pushing Jesus. It's like, okay, it's your time now, son. So, Mom, it's not my time. Yeah, it's your time. Let's go. Let's get to it. So that there's that anticipatory reality. But now, here's the thing I always say if we take the full picture of Jesus' interactions with Mary. What if we imagine that they share a story? Which is to say that what we see is not only Jesus responding to Mary's actions, but Mary responding to the situation that Jesus is in. So I'm going to do a little bit of psychologizing, but hopefully it will not offend anybody. So, when you're close to your mother, even if you're not close with your mother, when you go through something, your mother goes through something, right? She's right there. And so there's a sense in which trying to figure out that dynamic that it's her and not her for you. Okay, Mom. All right, Mom, let me take care of this, Mom. you don't need to step into this. Or, Mom, give me some space. That kind of dynamic. I would submit that there is something there about the ministry of Mary not stopping after Jesus' baptism. That's what I'm going after. And so the ongoing engagement with Mary. Now again, someone can say this is all speculation. We don't have gospel stories that lay this out. But in point of fact, we do. I mean, when we think about Mary's interactions with Jesus, Mary's not passive. She's not background. She's not, a stage prop. She's not an actress who's finished her last line and is now standing in the corner waiting for the next scene. That there is an ongoing engagement, not only with the ministry of Jesus, but her own ministry. So, for example, in the Gospels where Jesus is talking, and then I'm thinking of Luke, especially where they say, isn't this, they respond to his, and they say, isn't this the carpenter's son? I mean, isn't this the son of the carpenter, Mary's baby? And as New Testament scholars tell us, to be called the carpenter's son is that's a derogatory term. But then they link Mary to that. Right? Carpenter's son, the carpenter's son, this is Mary's child, which suggests an ongoing recognition that this is a problematic person. So I want to hold out that possibility, especially for those who have had troublesome mothers.
Troublesome.
I think you might want to repeat that. People didn't hear what you said.
Oh, I think they could guess. Those of us who are troublesome mothers.
I have another question. Must we not emphasize the maleness of Christ if we want to stress the femaleness of Mary? How can we square or interpret consistently the emphasis on the concrete particularities of Mary, e.g., womanhood or reproductive capacity, with the scandal problem of particularity with regard to Jesus, namely maleness? This
is always an interesting question about particularity. So the question is, there's always two questions. What do you mean by stressing it? And then the old one, what is a man? What is a woman? We do want to recognize the historical reality of Mary, that she is truly the bearer of God. And we do want to recognize that that God has come into the flesh. We don't want to build an exact image of what a man is, and then plop Jesus inside that, or a woman, and plop Mary inside that. Just like we don't want to build an image of what God is and plop God inside that, because inevitably we lose all three once we start doing that. So the question about particularity always has to be framed inside the actual history that's shown in the biblical witness. What's actually there, and not what the image of what a man is that we then map across the Gospels. There's enough mapping of manhood going on right now where I'm from that I've had enough of that for the rest of my life, and I'm sure many of you have as well. But I think that's part of the difficulty here. We should, however, stress the Jewishness of Jesus and recognize that he is a part of a people, and to be a part of a people who understand Roman occupation and who understand the struggles of what it means to follow the Word of God. And so we can't lose that Mary is a Jewish mother under occupation. And that's enough for me to start to fill out what it means for her to be a woman.
Great. Another question. Nothing happens to God, but God happens to everything else, and nothing happens without Mary. This gets sidelined or diminished somewhat in Protestant circles especially. How might we recover this in our theological, liturgical life without, like you say, mapping models onto Mary's body or giving her a purely utilitarian function?
Let me see if I got that first part. Nothing happens to God,
but God happens to everything else.
But God happens to everything else. I'm not sure I understand that. Nothing happens to God, but God happens to everything else. Nothing happens to God.
I think the question might be, how might this be worked out in our liturgical life?
Oh, okay. Okay.
Without collapsing into Mary as utilitarian.
Oh, okay. I got caught up with the first part, the metaphysics there. I was a little trying to see mine. So, I thought I was in some ways demonstrating that with the icons and with the poetry. That is to say, especially those of us who are Protestants, we need a good solid dose of Marian devotion. We really do. And we need a good solid dose of Mariological contemplation. So that when we talk about the incarnation, we're not just fixated on the God-man, that we're actually thinking about the very nature of God entering into the full fabrics and contours of creaturely life. We need that. And so my encouragement is in our preaching and in our singing and our teaching that we would invite people into the full reality of God in flesh. Not God became flesh and that's over. Good job, God. But that we really enter fully into what that means for, let's use the language that most people know, solidarity. I still like the word solidarity. I just think it needs to be filled out a whole lot more. Don't you guys think so? I think it needs to be filled out a whole lot more.
And then, following on from that in some ways, does the sanitization of Mary remove the experiences of trauma, which we know are held within bodies and carried through ancestral lines? And is the cross the culmination and or release of that trauma?
Oh, that's a great question. You guys want to start with that one? Because that's a beautiful question.
They want to hear you.
Okay,
Come on, Jane, up your game.
That's a beautiful question. Oh my goodness. Well, I tried to gesture toward that with what Jesus must have learned from his mother. I always worry about overloading the cross with everything and undermining the salvific work of the life of Jesus, the working out of his mama's story that is his. This is why I wanted you to think about, as I said it, she must have told him that they tried to kill him. She must have shared with him the trauma that is in her own body. I was in Egypt. We had to escape. We came back. I was looking over my shoulder. I was worried. They are out to get you. Children died because of you. All of that, and it's a life working that out. It's not simply worked out once we hit the cross. It's worked out in acts of forgiveness. So let's think about it this way. The Roman soldiers killed your people. And once you start your ministry, one comes to you and says, I believe in you. And you look at this, you tried to kill me. You hate me. The Gentiles who hate you are following you. And you have to work out how you will forgive and heal your enemies. Let's not save it for the cross. Let's do it right there in his ministry. You have to there work with the legacy of hatred and violence, fear and suspicion, because your mother had to. And now you have to move forward inside of what she knows. I'm not telling you what most people in this room don't know. If your parents have suffered oppression, hatred, violence, and they tell you, and then they tell you the very people who did this to us are here with you. And you have to work out how you will live with those very people. That's what Jesus is doing. We don't have to wait till the cross. He's already doing it. So that by the time he comes to the cross and he says the word of forgiveness, that's not the first time he showed it.
Well, that seems a very fitting end to our time together. So let's show our appreciation to Dr. Jennings and to Jane and to Chris.